Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to my channel where I essentially talk about things that I've read and find comment worthy. And as you can see from the title, I titled it The First Rule of Fight Club. This video is going to be about Paul Graham's essay titled What You Can't Say, in which he explains kind of like how to develop a non-conformist worldview and how to benefit from it and why essentially, founders benefit the most of it. And I have linked down below the article, which you can find on his website, alongside with all other essays that he's ever written. And he's quite active, so do make the time to maybe read the essays. He explains quite a lot of things that are not necessarily tied to entrepreneurship and being a founder, but just being an active individual as well, like on a day-to-day basis. So do that. Anyways, for all those who are kind of familiar with the startup world, you probably know one of the interview questions that Peter Thiel likes to pose, which is or like goes something like, what is one worldview or one opinion that you hold that a lot of your peers would not agree with, right? And so what he's essentially testing is your mind stretch in terms of how far can you think or how much have you already done in terms of thinking to come upon a point where you have so many opinions that do not fit the current cultural societal values and climate. So he doesn't necessarily expect you to say, oh, the education system is screwed and oh, politics is a theater. That is not something that is non-conformist because we all believe that and we all say that. Um, but again, you could, for instance, cop something like talk about that your existence, for instance, is tied to your achievements. Because in our society currently, we always say that your existence, you can exist for yourself. You don't necessarily need to prove anybody something. And as long as you're trying to back up nonconformist view, that is essentially what Peter Thiel and Paul Graham look for and do explain that this is actually good mind exercise. But again, you should not fall into the trap of spreading hate, for instance, because that is not a conformist view. That might be a racist view. Anyways, so how does, Graham walks us through that? So he shows us kind of examples where you had scientists like Galileo Galilei who, proved that the Earth is going around the sun, that he was essentially prosecuted for the thought that he had, which is again not according to his times. And I feel like you can think a lot about scientists in that way, like Einstein, Hawking, all these people who made these breakthroughs, they were non-conformists. So they just didn't agree with the current assumptions that we have. And your job, according to the essay, is to look for ideas that are suppressed. Because these are the ideas that make these intelligent people pop off in terms of success, in terms of, finding prestige. Because these ideas, they are so simple sometimes, like the natural selection of Darwin, that you might not really think that much about them. And that's why it's so important to develop this view of the nonconformist, because a lot of these groundbreaking ideas, even for business, they are literally there. You just need to find them. And we don't, right? As kids, we are because we ask a lot of stupid questions. We ask a lot of questions and we tend to come to the conclusion that we don't know anything as kids, right? That's why we ask. And that's why we're not ashamed to ask. Um, as soon as we get older, we stop asking because we feel like there's an obligation to know stuff, which we probably haven't read and confirmed for ourselves that this is indeed true, right? Like you can take the conservatives for this example. Like they argue a lot of with the Bible. The question is, did they read the Bible to understand what they're saying is true, can be inferred of these religious texts, or are they just using it because they know that you probably haven't read it and they did not, like as well? So no one can really tell them that the argument is wrong because you haven't read these religious texts. So that is something that a nonconformist would probably kind of come across and would be able to handle it because they're asking these questions and because they're going after the answers. So kids are really good at that. So surround yourself with kids from time to time. You will learn quite a lot from them in terms of asking questions and seeing the world. And there's a lot of interesting studies about how kids perceive the world that we do not, because we essentially, as I did talk about in earlier videos, we lose our genius. Like we lose these creative sparks and being spontaneous in how we think to these systems, to being conformist. So essentially, nonconformist is also trying to get you back into a childlike state. So keep that also in mind. What else? I feel like the examples were quite clear because Paul Graham, in his essay, he does talk about a yellow movement, um, or like a non-yellow movement, in which he kind of portrays the world as they're trying to ban the color yellow. And you, as an individual, you start asking yourself, well, why is the color yellow banned? Because it's not necessarily bad, like you don't see the importance behind the ban. And here comes essentially the Fight Club rule, which is like we didn't talk about that yet, is you can think anything in your head, but you are bound to a certain extent to society to what you can say. Because again, a lot of these conformists, they're quite passionate about their views. They didn't necessarily think about them, but they're passionate. So if you go up against them, you might need to turn like Noam Chomsky. And if you don't know who Noam Chomsky is, he is an American writer. He teaches at MIT in the linguistic department, and he has written a lot of books on political topics, social topics, and pretty interesting stuff. Unfortunately, he was on the Epstein list, so yeah, I don't know what to think about that. But that is the main message. In short, to be a nonconformist is kind of like turning yourself into a child again, to experience childlike wonder and go against views that you have as an adult or that you developed over the last years and try to find answers because you're curious, because you want to know more. If you do that, you can assume that if you are a founder, you will find a lot of great things, a lot of great ideas that you can develop and iterate on. You will win big, financially speaking. But you are bound to society, to what you can say. That is why the title of this video is called The First Rule of Fight Club, is not to talk about Fight Club or like not to mention it. Remember maybe one thing. Your mind is free. It can take you to any place, it can take you to any thought, it can take you to any situation that you like, but you cannot express every thought that you have to society or to social media in that sense. So you need to be careful in what you say and how you frame it, because a majority of us, maybe even myself included, we don't necessarily like nonconformist views and we think of them as hilarious and stupid and as a time waste. And if you do want to retain a certain sense of authority, you need to be pretty sneaky about how you frame um your your nonconformist views. Yeah, that's it. So if you stick to the end, thank you. I hope you did learn something. Maybe you do read the essay. Apart from that, feel free to subscribe and see you until the next video. Bye.